The Japan Times, 19th of February 2023, China hopes to be successful in its diplomacy efforts to win over Europe. Before attacking Taiwan, China, a Russian ally, is weakening NATO by taking advantage of the Russian incursion. Call it a comeback, China is regaining political ground in Europe, from Berlin to Paris to Rome, despite its skepticism regarding Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Xi Jinping, the president of China, had it made for him. All the Communist Party General Secretary had to do was tell his wolf warrior diplomats to keep quiet because their overt patriotism had worn thin, revoke the harsh zero-COVID policy, and declare that China was once again available for business. Even though Xi's leadership has made China more belligerent, a Cold War between the two parties has been and will continue to be unlikely. Since China views Europe as a dying empire, Brussels and Beijing do not engage in a doctrinal or military rivalry like the United States and China. Europe, which recoils at American-style confrontation with the biggest importer of its products, has never taken to the less harmful idea of decoupling. China must be admitted, it cannot be excluded. This is the viewpoint that separates the United States and Europe, said French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire at the World Economic Forum last month. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, had a slightly different viewpoint. She argued that Europe should focus on de-risking rather than separating. The de-risking standard has been set low for Germany. In November, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz traveled to China with a strong business delegation to inform Xi that Berlin is still primarily concerned with establishing business relations. Because Xi opposed using nuclear weapons in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Scholz claimed that he had achieved a diplomatic victory. In actuality, China came out on top. Xi appeased Scholz while avoiding explicitly criticizing Vladimir Putin, his close ally. Xi reminded Putin not to cross the Rubicon, which would harm China's interests, while deferring judgment on Moscow's role in the more significant conflict by urging the international community to reject the threat of nuclear weapons and advocate against a nuclear war to prevent a crisis on the Eurasian continent. Scholz informed Chinese Premier Li Keqiang that the two nations were no supporters of decoupling during his visit to Beijing, the first by a European leader since Xi's comeback to the global stage. Data from the German Statistical Office support that assertion. 2022 will see a 21% yearly growth in trade between China and Germany, reaching €298 billion, $320 billion. Germany continues to rely on China for the rare earth metals used in the semiconductors, batteries, and magnets of electric vehicles, an industry on which it has placed significant bets. Meanwhile, in the first half of 2022, German companies invested an unprecedented €10 billion in China. Compared to German politicians asking for a decrease in their nation's reliance on China, this money speaks louder. After Scholz, French President Emmanuel Macron might be the next European leader to speak with Xi. According to reports, Macron will travel to China in April to discuss energy, trade, and the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. One can only hope that the French president will be more successful in persuading Xi to mediate a resolution than he was in persuading Putin not to start the war. Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, might outshine Macron. She accepted Xi's offer to visit China, which he extended during their APEC meeting in Bali last November. She wants to increase Italian exports to China, Italy's biggest trading partner in Asia, whereas Xi's agenda will be more political. At APEC, she was addressed by the Chinese leader, who expressed the hope that Rome would inspire the EU to follow an independent and positive China policy. Since being chosen as Prime Minister, Meloni has toned down her criticism of China, expressed support for Taiwan, and pledged not to renew Italy's participation in Beijing's contentious Belt and Road Initiative. Chinese money has also softened Meloni's stance. China encounters a less favorable reception in Central and Eastern Europe. States that endured the Iron Curtain and have more at stake in the Russia-Ukraine conflict than the affluent west of Europe are appalled by Beijing's failure to denounce Moscow's heinous aggression. They are advancing toward the United States and, in some instances, Taiwan, free from the constraints of their economic dependence on China. China has made an effort to use Lithuania as an example, or as the Communist Party would say, kill the monkey to frighten the chickens. China has downgraded diplomatic ties and barred the majority of imports from the tiny Baltic nation of Lithuania as retaliation for Lithuania's outreach to Taiwan, which includes allowing the establishment of a de facto embassy with the name Taiwanese Representative Office in the capital city of Vilnius. Beijing's coercion on Lithuania can be ignored because their economic ties are insignificant. Increased commerce with Taiwan and the United States will be more beneficial for Vilnius. To achieve this, it and Washington agreed to an export credit arrangement worth $600 million in late 2021. Taiwan announced a $1 billion credit initiative in the first quarter of 2022 to finance partnerships with Lithuanian businesses across 6 industries. At the same time, the EU has not become more divided as a result of China's intimidation of Lithuania. Instead, Europe has filed a World Trade Organization complaint against China and given Vilnius a €130 million aid package. It appears that the Czech Republic will be the next domino to collapse. Petr Pavel, the incoming president of the Czech Republic, spoke on the phone with Tsai Ing-wen, the president of Taiwan, in January, drawing a stern reprimand from China. According to the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning, he has continued to cross China's red line, severely interfering in China's internal affairs and hurting the emotions of the Chinese people. As a sovereign country, we determine ourselves who we have calls with and who we will meet, Czech Prime Minister Petr Fiala said in a statement regarding the call. Even though it is still early, China has not yet sanctioned Prague. However, Beijing may exercise caution this time, aware that such bellicosity could backfire and undermine its relations with the EU. At the moment, China is using coercive tactics to intimidate Europe. China's envoy to the EU, Fu Kong, recently warned the community, saying Beijing considers increasing interaction with Taiwan to violate the illegal One China principle and a red line. Fu advised the EU to hold off signing a business pact with Taiwan. Due to the difficulty of the project, which would require unanimous consent from all 27 members of the Union, Beijing will succeed in dividing Europe. It will be more difficult for China to exert influence over specific EU member states, particularly those most at risk from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Contrary to Beijing's intensely emotional but categorically non-existential obsession with Taiwan, resisting authoritarian expansionism is a matter of life for these countries. China has made it plain that it supports despotism by standing with Moscow. The EU's most significant economies must prioritize a stable relationship with Beijing to protect their commercial interests, even though Western Europe is uncomfortable with the Beijing-Moscow axis. They continue to harbor hope that China will contribute to a Russia-Ukraine war resolution acceptable to Kyiv and the West. Always wishful reasoning, that. At this point, it resembles more of a fantasy, particularly after Fu told the EU that it was important to address the security concerns of both sides in the conflict.